Welcome to the Jay Kim Show, Hong Kong's first dedicated podcast on investing in Asia. Join us as we survey the land and discover the greatest companies and most profitable investment opportunities in Asia. If this is your first time listening, thank you for stopping by. This podcast is produced every week with the goal of providing actionable insights to you, the listener, with every single episode. And now, on to the show. My guest today is JD Sherman. JD is the president and chief operating officer of HubSpot. Before joining HubSpot, he worked in finance, serving as the CFO of Akamai and chief financial executive of IBM's Systems and Technology Group. JD, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I'm excited because I hear about your company a lot these days, especially even in Asia. I've been seeing you guys doing a lot of outreach and stuff. So I'm excited to have you on, and hopefully we can help your cause here. Why don't you give us a little bit of background? I gave the broad strokes in the introduction, but maybe you could give us a little personal background for the audience.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. As you mentioned, I have mostly a finance career until my time at HubSpot. In fact, I was very happily entrenched in my CFO role at Akamai Technologies, which is a great company. But I happened to meet Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Shah, our founders at HubSpot, and they were talking about hiring a COO, and I actually got introduced to Brian to be a back channel reference for one of their candidates. But yeah, he and I kind of hit it off, and we started talking, and he was starting to tell me about their view of the world, which was that, the way people live, work, shop, and buy today is just totally different than how they did 10 or 15 years ago. We're just so hard to interrupt. The old marketing and sales playbook just didn't work. So there needed to be a new marketing sales playbook that they were calling inbound marketing, which is less about interrupting your customers or prospects while they're on somebody else's television show or reading the newspaper or something like that, and instead creating a magnet around your business with remarkable content and helpful engagement where your customers lived and work today, which is on the internet and over social media. It just made so much sense to me that it seemed like there was a big opportunity there. So I actually took the role as chief operating officer, and that was 7 years ago. And it's been a great run since. That's
a very cool story. Thanks for sharing that. I had no clue that's how you got connected with the company, and it must have been quite a conversation to literally have you step out of your finance role and join this. I guess was this before you guys listed?
It was, yeah. So this was back in the end of 2011. I started talking to Brian and Dharmesh, and the company was it sort of had hit its product market fit. So they definitely had figured out that there was a market need for their product, and they were starting to get traction with it. But we hadn't sort of figured out business model fit yet. So it was about a $20 million revenue business with about 200 employees, but it wasn't quite clear yet how we would scale. Like, for example, the customer churn was just really horrible. It wasn't going to scale. And as you know, from a software as a service business, if your customers don't stick around, you're going to have a real trouble building a strong business on that. So there were problems like that had to be addressed. And even back then, Brian and Dharmesh were thinking big, and they knew that they wanted to build a business that scaled, not just simply a software product that eventually would maybe end up in the hands of another company through an acquisition or something.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, it sounds like it was somewhat of a mature company, so it wasn't a pure startup, but nonetheless, it was at the sort of inflection point. And I guess that's probably why they were looking to hire more executives and really figure out how to scale it to the next level.
I don't think that I, with my background, would be that useful to a pure startup. I'm not the kind of guy who's going to, be creative in terms of the products that you would build or engaging with prospects and customers to figure out if there's a great market fit there. I'm more of a scale-up guy, and the way we talk about HubSpot even now is we've moved from startup mode to scale-up mode, and there's a tremendous amount of leverage for a business in that scale-up mode because you can it's exciting to get to the point where you even can take your company public. And when we took our company public, maybe 10,000 customers, which was pretty amazing.
Right.
But now after, 4 or 5 years being public, we have over 50,000 customers, and we've gone from one product line to 3 product lines. We've really built a platform that lots of our customers are using to integrate the rest of their business software into. And so you could just have a much bigger impact if you figure out how to really scale your company.
Wow, that's incredible. What I don't know if you maybe you can spend a little bit of time, and it doesn't have to be too long. But how did the two co-founders actually start HubSpot from the very beginning?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to tell you that story. It's one that we told, 75 times on the IPO roadshow. So
That's
I'm
right.
fine to do that. So basically, Brian and Dharmesh were colleagues at the Sloan School of Business at MIT.
Hmm.
Dharmesh had started and sold a business earlier in his career, and was back and was now getting his MBA. And Brian had grown up through the sales channel of a company called PTC, Parametric Technology in Boston. And he was really a sales and marketing guy. And while Brian was at MIT, he was working with a local VC and trying to help their portfolio companies, get their go-to-market act together. What Brian was finding was these companies would get lots of VC funding, and then he'd say, okay, great, what's your playbook? And they all had exactly the same playbook, which is we're going to buy a bunch of ads. We're going to do some PR. We're going to hire sales reps who are going to cold call. We're going to buy lists, and we're going to email the lists. And he'd say, how's that working for you? And they're like, well, it's a tough slog. So he had that in the back of his head. And then he met Dharmesh, who had started a blog called onstartups.com, where he basically wrote about his experience as a startup founder and the advice he learned and everything like that. And Dharmesh was building this huge audience, really with no resources whatsoever other than, typing onto his computer and creating content that people were searching for, that people were really trying to find, not trying to interrupt them, but drawing them in like a magnet. And they kind of put two and two together, and they said, well, the first problem is we have to teach people how to do this. And that's where inbound marketing came from. And the two of them actually have written a book called Inbound Marketing to talk about sort of that strategy. The second part was a little bit of discovery as well, which was that Brian said, all right, I'm going to go put this playbook into place with some of these portfolio companies. And he said, what kind of tools do we need? And Dharmesh said, oh, it's pretty simple, because Dharmesh is a tech guy. You need a website, you need a blog, you need social media tools, you need an email tool, you need landing pages, you need forms, and all this stuff has to work together, and you just wire it this way and that way. And Brian's head started to spin because mere mortals can't pull that off.
Yes.
What you need is a platform to be able to do that. And so they set off to build HubSpot as sort of a tool to enable people to run this new inbound marketing playbook. And what's happened over the 10 or 12 years since is that we've expanded that to include the sales part of the customer experience, and then most recently the service part of the customer experience.
Right. So this is that's a great story, and I think it came at a time during I guess sort of the internet where Web 2.0 and people were starting to blog and this sort of thing. So it was very timely for this business to launch HubSpots from the early days. You mentioned inbound marketing earlier, and you differentiated that between sort of traditional marketing, which you said was kind of like disrupting, like watching an ad on TV or during the Super Bowl or this sort of thing, versus inbound marketing. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what exactly is inbound marketing, and how is it how has it grown today versus say early days of Web 2.0?
Sure. Okay. So the two ways I like to think about inbound marketing as not a career marketer or salesperson. One way is from a consumer's perspective, which is inbound marketing is about adding value before you extract value. If you think about, and it's about being helpful rather than interruptive. So if you think about an advertisement that you might see in a newspaper or listen to on the radio, or even a banner ad that you might come across on the internet, that's somebody trying to catch your attention and extract some of your time and effort before they've really added any value to you. Right. And it may or may not be interesting to you. Whereas when you create your own content, whether it's a blog or a podcast like this or video or engagement on social media, that gets found by an audience who's looking for your content, and it's helpful, not interruptive, and it's going to add value to them before it extracts value to them. The other strategy about inbound marketing and sales is you don't want to start with, hey, my product is this awesome sewing machine. Why don't you buy my product? You want to start talking about, how do you use this machine, or what are some of the ways that people have solved these problems with similar products, and draw people into solving a problem rather than immediately going to, here's a product you should buy, and I want to extract this value from you. So that's the one way I like to explain it. The other way comes from my finance background, which is I think about the first engagement I ever had with the CMO of my company, Akamai, was he came into my office and he had an opportunity to spend millions of dollars to put our company logo on the wall of Fenway Park, where the Boston Red Sox play, the baseball team. Yep. And it was going to cost lots and lots of money. And it was really hard to sort of attribute that to any ROI, because what he was doing basically was renting somebody else's audience. He was renting from the Red Sox the people that went into the stadium. Whereas when you're doing content marketing, you're building an asset with your content. So you're kind of building a factory. It's an asset rather than just an expense. And once you've built that factory, it takes a while to build, where you get visitors to your website and your content is starts to get search authority, et cetera. Once you've built it, though, the engagement and the leads and the customers start coming in. And even if you turn off the lights of your marketing department, you still get those leads and those customers coming in over time.
Right. Okay. All right. So that's a very good way of explaining it. I mean, I think that it particularly helps because now on the internet, there's just a flood of content, right? And so the traditional ways of sort of trying to interrupt people and get their attention, that doesn't work. So you kind of have to build it more organically. You have to build trust with your audience, like you said, build sort of a tribe or a following. And then that creates this inbound marketing channel where you can then eventually sell them, or maybe it becomes a reverse inquiry and they just request products from you. So that definitely makes sense. So let's talk about HubSpot specifically. You mentioned that, look, anyone that's listening that's tried to sort of set up a blog and try to monetize it online, I think has gone through all the sort of pain points of, literally setting up a WordPress website, connecting a email service provider like ConvertKit or MailChimp or something like that, and then trying to plug in maybe like a ClickFunnels and some sort of scheduling thing, and it's a nightmare. I've actually personally done it myself, or tried a couple times, and it's an absolute nightmare. And so my understanding is that HubSpot aims to basically solve all of this in a one-stop shop solution. Is that accurate?
That's exactly right.
Okay, so and then the types of clients. I mean, you guys are dealing with basically large corporations, enterprises. Do you actually have anything on sort of the smaller business and just solopreneur type level, or is it mainly due to pricing for enterprises?
So actually, we target our customer base that we want to try to help is actually the mid-market, the smaller and medium businesses. We really don't go after the large enterprises. One of the great things about the internet and technology in general, and therefore inbound marketing and sales and this whole approach, is it's kind of a democratization of business. Because in the old world, where it was about traditional advertising and interrupting, it was about the size of your wallet. How much could you spend to get people's attention? That was really difficult for smaller businesses. In this new world, it's about the size of your brain. It's about the customer experience you create. It's about the content you create. It's about the way you take care of your prospects, et cetera. And that's really good news for small and medium businesses. And so we think there's a huge opportunity for those types of businesses in this world. And that's what we want to focus on. We have 50,000 customers, and our average customer probably has 50 to 75 employees. We don't have a ton of very large customers, although frankly, I think they should probably be using an inbound marketing and sales approach, and we'd love if they would use our software as well, but we really focus on that mid-market.
Right. And does that include social media marketing as well on the platform?
Yes, it does. So we have social media marketing tools for HubSpot as well. The way I think about, we have a very broad set set of tools.
Mhm.
Everything from the top of the funnel type tools to get to grow your audiences, right through the types of tools that you use to take care of your customers and actually create advocates and promoters from your customers, who turn out in this day and age, in a major sort of evolution to be probably your best route to market. So we have a very broad range of tools. We also have something like 200 software companies that have an integration with HubSpot. And that includes a lot of the social media advanced tool sets, because sometimes a customer of ours is going to want to have a more sophisticated approach to social media marketing, or a more sophisticated approach to their website, or et cetera. And we're not going to build all of that sophistication, particularly since we're targeted at the mid-market. So we also allow our customers through APIs and et cetera to integrate other tool sets with HubSpot.
Right. Yeah, I think that marketing is evolving as well as time goes on. So it's good to offer all the tools, and I'm sure you can customize it based off of what your
Yeah.
company needs and this sort of thing. I
I think
really like how
in
you
early
just.
days, we actually thought we were going to be an all-in-one tool. And what you realize is, back in the day, we actually have a guy that works for us now named Scott Brinker, who publishes the Martech 5000, this chart of 5,000 companies in the marketing tech space. And
Oh, really?
we thought, well, nobody's going to need to use all that. They're just going to use HubSpot. We're going to be an all-in-one platform. We realized that that's frankly impossible, because we can't do it all, and people want to be specialized in one area or more sophisticated in one area. So we've started to think about our mission not to be an all-in-one, but to be an all-on-one. Like, if we can help our customers with a platform that's sort of the center of gravity for their flywheel, as we like to call it, which is about marketing, sales, and services, then we're going to really help them grow their businesses.
Right. Uh, I like how, JD, I like how you explained it from what you guys do from a finance perspective, because I'm a finance guy, and I think a lot of our audience is actually finance or investors. And you mentioned it, viewing the marketing as not as an expense, but as like almost like a balance sheet item, right? Like an asset or an investment, which I think is a
Exactly.
unique way of thinking about things. And I imagine that's like a good sort of sales pitch to a CFO of one of these potential clients that you guys have. But I would think that one of the biggest pushbacks would be, like you said, the ROI and how that is able, how can you track that? What would you say to a CFO that is potentially looking at your solution, that's pushing back with this type of question?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. In fact, I have a talk that I give that's called how to convince your CFO, or how to sell inbound marketing and sales to your CFO, and that's exactly what it is. Because, as you know, as a former finance guy, we view expenses in one way very differently than we view assets and liabilities. Right?
Totally.
Expenses are something to be minimized and you get efficiency. Assets are something to invest in, and get a return based
That's
on
right.
that. Another concept that I've applied a sort of a finance background to, that is more marketing and sales related to, is a concept that I call customer capital, which is, you have working capital, which is your short-term assets minus your short-term liability. And if you have negative working capital, you're in real trouble.
Yep.
Your customer capital is the amount of promoters you have of your brand versus the amount of detractors, which you measure with Net Promoter Score. And if that goes negative on you, you're going to have real trouble. You're going to have a lot of friction in your process. So the key, of course, when you're working on assets and talking about investing in those assets, is measuring the ROI.
Mm-hmm.
The other point I make with inbound marketing and sales is it's actually much easier to do attribution and figure out the ROI with an inbound marketing and sales approach than it is with a broad brush brand campaign, such as putting your company's logo on an arena or advertising, for example.
Right.
There are tools around there. And what you can do, and the advice I give to marketing and sales leaders is, this is an opportunity for you to go collaborate with your finance teams and say, look, here's the data I have. What we want to do is we want to experiment. We want to put this in and see if what we get back out. We want to, make that investment and see if and here's our hypothesis of what we think it's going to generate. And is it generating that or not? And get the finance team involved in that analysis. And then that collaboration really tends to help the business.
Do you think that that old school method of advertising still actually works? Like paying $1 million for like a Super Bowl halftime ad or stuff like that. I mean, is that still effective?
Well, actually, interestingly enough, I think the Big Bang, the Super Bowl ad probably still works. Okay. I'm less convinced that, sort of the broad brush advertising that you see, sort of all over the place, whether that still works. It must still be effective at some point because people still keep doing it. Like one of the things I ask very often when I'm talking to an audience about the old way is like, how many of you guys have ever gotten a piece of mail, direct mail in your house and opened it up and said, boy, this looks like a really neat product, and then went and bought that product? And of course, I have not yet come across anybody that says they have done that, but somebody is lying because we still get a lot of direct mail. So it must work at some point. But, another observation, and Dharmesh has had this observation, I really believe him, is it used to be that you could do that, and if it didn't work, you had a 0 ROI on it. And that was fine. You could live with a 0 ROI. But nowadays, because people get frustrated with brands who behave badly, who interrupt them, who don't, you actually have a negative ROI because you turn those people into detractors. And, people, like the percentage of time that somebody goes and looks either for reviews or talks to their friends about your product or service before they buy, it happens a majority of the time. And if you're creating friction by not behaving well as a brand, it's going to be a problem.
That's interesting. Yeah, I like how you break that down between sort of detractors and what's accretive or helpful for your brand. I'm curious what you think about when I look at marketing, and I'm not a marketer by any means, but I've kind of had to study it in the last few years when doing things like setting up this podcast, for example, and stuff like that. It kind of makes you have to get up to speed. After Web 2.0, there was a period where if you were a blogger, you could get a lot of subscribers very easily. If you were an early adopter, and same thing as social media. I feel like if you were one of the first 1,000 users of Twitter, you automatically get a bunch of followers. And then now it's kind of been saturated. I feel like everyone is everywhere, all over social media, all over content marketing. It's almost like it's the minimum bar that you need just to compete in the arena. Now that's actually good for your business because it means that everyone out there just to play the game is going to have some sort of inbound marketing campaign or strategy, right? Some home base that they can build their business off of. I'm just curious as what you think is sort of what's the next iteration of this whole marketing thing, because I know that there are still a lot of large sort of businesses and medium businesses that need to do this and are coming online and they're getting savvy with social media, all these older school sort of business models that, used to buy the billboards, they're now shifting. What's the next iteration for people, in your opinion, that are here, or is this how it's going to be for the foreseeable future?
No, I think that's an absolutely correct observation, and I think there are a couple of things that we're seeing that are somewhat tactical. This is like the conversation we have when our customers are looking for advice from us, and it's sort of, I guess I'd put it into sort of three buckets. The first is specialization. As you say, it's a very broad landscape out there, and there's just so much noise now out there. We used to tell customers, you just have to crank out the content to get found.
Right. And
now what we say is it has to be carefully crafted and probably specialized to what you're trying to accomplish. And a lesser amount of content of higher quality actually makes more sense in today's day and age than a lot of really crappy content.
Right.
And part of that goes back to the, building trust in your brand thing. But that's the first part of it. The second part of it is we do believe, and I believe that there's a healthy relationship between a targeted paid advertising relationship and the content you create. Because today, the worlds of Google and Facebook being these very dominant platforms, you want to sort of, when you have content that is sort of working for you and creating some interest, you want to pour a little gasoline onto that fire by sort of pushing that through paid channels, particularly Facebook and Google, which are working very well. So that's tactical advice we give to folks. And then the third really comes down to this new opportunity that we see, which is around delighted customers being your best route to market, and making sure that you're creating from your own customer base delighted customers who are going to advocate for you and be a
Right.
great route to market. And so I think that's the new opportunity that particularly fits well with small and medium businesses, because they tend to be closer to their customer. They tend to know more about what their customers want. And so, what our advice to customers who are talking about marketing sales initially is, we say, well, you have to think about that across the entire customer life cycle. And you have to ask yourself where you're putting those calories. And if you're putting most of them at the sort of stage where you're engaging with your customers, trying to sell them your product, and you're not doing as much in the delighting your customers part of the business, we suggest you kind of shift that around a little bit and try to create another channel to market, if you will, through delighted customers.
That's a great way of thinking about it, because it's not what most people think when they think about customers. They just think sort of bottom line and revenue and numbers, but to actually be able to then use them to help you with future marketing is pretty clever.
Turns out they want to do it as well. When they're passionate about a brand, they're definitely, and it goes both ways, unfortunately, for all of us, right? If you deliver a bad customer experience, people can't wait to tell everybody else about what a crappy company you are.
Yes, yes, and it's a dangerous. It's a very slippery slope, especially with social media and this sort of thing these days. So I know that you guys are doing a lot of stuff globally. So I was actually recently last weekend I was in Sydney for this startup conference called StartCon, and I saw one of your colleagues there, Andrew Lindsay, who I think is your corporate development guy. He was giving a nice
Right.
talk. So I saw him speak, and so I've been seeing HubSpot a lot. Being based in Asia, this is sort of a more of a frontier market for this whole. People are still getting up to speed with how to do marketing properly. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your plans are, for 2019 and that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I was just in Asia myself last month
Hmm.
for 2.5 weeks. I went to see all of our offices. We have an office in Singapore, which is our Asia Pac sort of corporate hub, our HQ. Down in Sydney, we have a big team, and we also have a team now in Tokyo.
Nice.
And Asia is our fastest growing area. We've sort of attacked the international opportunity in phases, if you will. And I think we've gone pretty fast, actually, because for a company as young as we are, we get 38% of our revenue outside the U.S., which is
Wow.
in my pretty impressive. But we kind of did it in phases. Like phase one was basically take our playbook that we developed in the United States in English to other markets similar to the United States that spoke English. So we had a lot of early success in the UK and Ireland, and we've actually been in Sydney, Australia since 2015. So that made a ton of sense. The next phase was to localize. And we really have only been at this for 2.5 years, where we finally localized our product into 4 or 5 languages. But we're still, with that playbook, largely targeting sort of mature markets where we know the playbook, we know that the customer persona really well, and it fits with our sort of acquisition model, our cost of acquisition,
Hmm.
the way customers want to be engaged with. The phase 3 that I'm most excited about, which we're really just starting to sink our teeth into the opportunity, is in emerging markets, because we've kind of omitted that opportunity for a while. We didn't really have the go-to-market model for that model. But now that we have this freemium model, we have a free version of our software, we have a starter version of our software. I think that positions us well to go after some markets like India and Brazil and others in Southeast Asia. And I'm super excited about that opportunity. And we're going to start to experiment with that a little bit in 2019.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I it was probably ignorant of me because I wasn't aware when I thought of HubSpot, I always thought it was for much larger sort of organizations. So it never kind of I never actually researched it for on the smaller business or even individual level. So that's fantastic to hear. JD, thanks so much for your time. It's been really fun catching up with you, and interesting to hear about the growth that you guys are experiencing, and we're excited to see how HubSpot keeps growing. What's the best place that people can find you, follow you, or learn more about HubSpot?
Well, certainly you can visit HubSpot.com. We have a blog that gets like 15 million visitors a month. I would encourage you guys.
Wow.
I know we've really built that up.
Practicing what you preach, right?
That's right. Absolutely. We are some of the best inbound marketers and salespeople in the world, thankfully. And Playbook definitely works. So, yeah, that's probably the best place to start and learn about HubSpot. I would also say go to HubSpot.com and get started with our free software. It's literally costless to sign up and pretty easy to get started.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for your time, and we look forward to hear more about HubSpot growing in the region here.
Okay, Jay, great talking to you.
All right, take care. Bye. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. All the show notes and links can be found over at jkimshow.com. Come back often and make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. Don't forget to join us next week for another exciting episode of The Jay Kim Show. I'd love to hear your comments. You can find me on Twitter at jaykimmer, JAYKIMMER. See you guys next week. This podcast is brought to you by Hack Your Fitness, the high achiever's guide to getting ripped in under 3 hours a week. If you're anything like me, you're probably working a full-time job or jobs and trying to find time to balance family life, social life, and last but not least, fitness. Look, I get it. I'm a full-time investor and entrepreneur myself, and father of two. So how am I able to stay fit year-round without spending hours and hours in the gym killing myself on the cardio machine? After struggling for the last 15 years trying every workout and diet under the sun, I finally designed a system that allows me to achieve and maintain single-digit body fat for life in under 3 hours a week. Cardio not required. Head on over to hackyour.fitness and download my free 13-page guide that teaches you the simple science behind efficient fitness and smart nutrition and gives you everything you need to know to finally take control of your life. That's hackyour.fitness.